The mountains of Kyrgyzstan rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks lost in the swirl of mist that seemed to cling to them like forgotten memories. 5 climbers, lifelong friends bound by shared adventures, had made camp near a small mountain lake. The water was black as ink, still as glass, and as they pitched their tents beneath the shadow of jagged cliffs, none of them noticed how the fog moved unnaturally over its surface, swirling in slow, hypnotic circles. They were seasoned explorers, accustomed to the mountain's unpredictability, but this night felt different, off, somehow. Maybe it was the sudden change in the wind, or the eerie silence that fell as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the peaks a deep crimson before they faded into the dark. Around midnight, fatigue set in after a long day's hike, and the friends started drifting toward their tents. But just as sleep began to claim them, a sound cut through the stillness. A noise so peculiar it made their blood run cold. It came from the lake, echoing through the valley like a cry and a laugh at once. A twisted sound that didn't seem human. They exchanged uneasy glances, their breath misting in the cold mountain air. "Did you hear that?" Armin, the group's leader, asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him, wide, alert, as if sensing something more than just wind playing tricks on their minds. "I heard it," replied Timur, his childhood friend, already standing and grabbing a flashlight. "Let's check it out." They all knew it wasn't wise to wander at night in such rugged terrain, but the curiosity gnawed at them, overriding their caution. The 5 of them, Armin, Timur, Eldar, Rustam, and Bek, grabbed their gear and set off toward the lake, drawn by the strange sound. As they neared the shore, a thick fog began to rise from the water. It was unlike any fog they had ever seen, dense and swirling, almost alive. From within it, small white lights flickered, dancing just out of reach, as though luring them closer. "What is that?" Rustam whispered, his breath quickening. The lights pulsed in rhythm with their footsteps, and the laughter cry grew louder, more insistent. Timur, walking in front, turned toward the others, his face pale in the faint beam of his flashlight. "We should go back," he said, but his voice was drowned out by the sound. The sound of laughter, now clearer, closer, and something else, whispers, faint and unintelligible, rising from the mist like ghostly voices. They took a few more hesitant steps toward the water, unable to resist the pull of the lights. But suddenly, Beck, who was walking last, realized something chilling. His feet were submerged. He was standing knee-deep in icy water, even though moments before, they had been on solid ground. "Stop! Stop!" Beck cried out, grabbing the nearest 2, Rustam and Eldar, and pulling them back. His voice, trembling with fear, broke through the strange spell that had gripped them. The 3 of them stumbled backward, out of the mist and away from the lake. But when they turned to call Timur and Armin, the 2 who had been walking ahead, they were gone, swallowed by the fog. Only the sound of the lake, now eerily silent, remained. Panic gripped the 3 survivors as they called out to their friends, but there was no answer. The fog had thickened, the lights had disappeared, and the dark water seemed to stretch on endlessly. They couldn't see the shore, couldn't tell where the land ended and the lake began. They searched for hours, their voices hoarse from shouting, but by the time dawn broke, there was no trace of their missing friends. Exhausted and numb with fear, the 3 of them stumbled back to camp and, in the light of day, raced down the mountain to find help. But help, when it came, was too late. By the time the rescuers arrived, the sun was setting once more, and the mountains were bathed in an ominous glow. They scoured the lake and the surrounding areas, but Armin and Timur were never found. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, taken by the mist. The rescuers shook their heads, muttering about strange disappearances and old mountain superstitions. They told the survivors that the lake had long been feared by locals, a place of bad omens and lost souls. And then, as the shadows lengthened, they spoke of the White Ones, spirits that supposedly lured travelers into the fog, never to return. But the horror didn't end with their disappearance. That evening, back at the base camp, Rustam and Eldar fell gravely ill. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably, fevered and weak, their eyes clouded with some unknown sickness. By the following night, both men were dead, leaving Beck as the only one alive. Beck was the last to survive, but the horrors of that night haunted him long after he returned to civilization. His dreams were plagued with visions of the lake, of the swirling fog, and of something more sinister, the White Ones. He could hear their whispers, even in waking life, as if the mountains had marked him with their curse. Desperate for answers, Beck turned to the local villagers, who spoke of ancient legends surrounding the lake. Stories of spirits that wandered the mountains, drawn to the living like moths to a flame. They said the White Ones were souls of those who had been lost to the fog, forever trapped in the liminal space between life and death. But as Beck delved deeper into the lore, he uncovered a darker truth. The spirits were not just passive wanderers. They were hunters, preying on the fear and doubt of those who ventured too close to their domain. Beck sat alone in a dimly lit bar, miles away from the mountains, yet he could still feel the cold bite of the Kyrgyz peaks. His body had returned, but his mind remained trapped by the lake, haunted by the shadows and the faces of his lost friends. Their eyes, their terrified, confused eyes, flashed in his dreams, in the edges of his vision, like ghosts refusing to be forgotten. The locals had been of no comfort. When he asked about the lake, about the fog, their faces darkened, their eyes shifting to the floor as if they feared something more than just wild stories. The older ones spoke in hushed voices about Exulder, the White Ones, spirits that roamed the mountains, luring the living into the mist. But the stories felt deeper, darker. The villagers wouldn't speak openly, as though the very mention of the lake could summon something unwanted. One night, however, an old woman, her wrinkled face hidden beneath a dark shawl, took pity on Beck. She spoke of an ancient curse, passed down through generations, tied to the lake and the strange lights that danced across its surface. They are not just spirits, she had said, her voice barely a whisper. They are hunters' shadows that feed on fear, on guilt. They take the ones who wander too close, but they leave their mark on the survivors. You escaped, but they have not let you go. Beck shuddered at her words. Every night since his return, the whispers had grown louder. In his dreams, the fog would rise again, the lights would shimmer just beyond reach, and Armin and Timur would stand there, at the edge of the water, staring at him with eyes hollow and white. The whispers were growing clearer. Come back, they said. Come back to us. Beck couldn't ignore the whispers any longer. He had tried to push them aside, tried to rationalize everything. Maybe the test of survival had fractured his mind. But deep down he knew there was something more. Something beyond explanation. Something waiting for him in the mountains. His friends were still out there, lost in the mist, and the only way to find peace, for them and for himself, was to return. Against all logic, against the warnings of the locals, Beck made the decision to go back to the lake. This time he would go alone. The last man standing, he thought grimly. The last to face whatever lurked in that cursed fog. When he arrived at the base of the mountain, the air felt heavier than before, charged with something unseen. He climbed in silence, the path eerily familiar, each step a reminder of how everything had gone so wrong. But there was a difference this time. He wasn't just retracing his steps. As he ascended, the landscape seemed to shift, becoming more surreal, as if the mountain itself was changing around him. Halfway up, Beck noticed a narrow, overgrown path to the right of the trail, a path he was sure had not been there before. Something called to him from that direction. His body felt tense, as though he were being watched, but he couldn't turn away. The whispers grew louder the closer he got to the path. We see you, they said. We know what you did. His heart pounded in his chest, but he couldn't stop. There was no going back now. He followed the path, winding deeper into the forest that clung to the mountainside. Soon, he found himself standing before an ancient stone shrine, half buried in moss and vines. At its center was a small offering bowl, filled with what looked like bones, brittle and gray. Suddenly, the fog began to rise again. Beck's breath quickened. From the depths of the mist, two figures appeared, Armin and Timur, their faces twisted in agony. But this time something was different. The lights that once flickered harmlessly in the mist were now brighter, more aggressive, like eyes watching him. "Why didn't you stop us?" Armin's voice echoed from the mist, a hollow, unnatural sound. "We followed you," Timur whispered, his face pale and gaunt. "We trusted you." The guilt Beck had been trying to suppress for weeks crashed over him like a wave. Was it his fault? Had his leadership, his decisions, doomed his friends? The whispers had latched onto his doubt, his fear, feeding on it, twisting it until it became truth in his mind. "No!" Beck shouted, backing away from the shrine. "I didn't—" His voice faltered, his strength sapped by the cold fog wrapping around him like hands pulling him down. The white ones, they were here. The fog thickened, swallowing Beck whole. His mind raced, trying to hold on to any semblance of reality. But the whispers wouldn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, more accusing. "We trusted you," the voices repeated. "You failed us." He fell to his knees, gasping for breath, the icy air burning his lungs. The mist coiled around him, and for a brief moment, he could feel hands, cold, skeletal hands, brushing against his skin, tugging him deeper into the fog. The air was filled with strange noises, like distant cries and echoes of laughter. And the lights were everywhere now, shifting and flickering like eyes, watching his every move. Felt as if time had stopped. Beck wasn't sure how long he remained there, kneeling in front of the shrine, before he heard another sound. Something beneath the whispers, something even more ancient. It was a deep rumble, like the shifting of the earth itself. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and then, slowly, the shrine began to crack open. From the dark crevice, a figure emerged, tall and cloaked in shadows. Its form was indistinct, like smoke taking shape, but Beck could sense its presence. Overpowering, malevolent. The whispers of the white ones seemed to cower in its presence, growing softer, as if even they feared this thing. The figure raised an arm, and Beck felt the cold grip of something indescribable tighten around his heart. "You trespass on sacred ground," it said, its voice a guttural rasp. "The white ones are mine." Beck's body froze. His limbs refused to move, his breath caught in his throat. The entity, this shadow, was ancient, older than the mountain, older than time itself. It was no mere spirit, no lingering soul trapped in the mist. It was the source of the curse, the thing that had claimed the lake and its surroundings as its own. And now it wanted him. Beck's mind was unraveling. The fog clung to him, pulling him closer to the dark entity, its voice filling his thoughts, smothering his will. He could feel his life slipping away, feel the weight of the mountain pressing down on him as though he were nothing but a fleeting thought in the grand scheme of things. "You must make an offering," the voice of the entity commanded, the words echoing in his skull. "A life for a life. Only then will you be free." Beck's body trembled, his mind reeling as the truth hit him like a hammer. The curse, the fog, the lights, the whispers. They were all tied to one thing: sacrifice. The white ones had once been like him, lured by the mountain, claimed by the fog. And now they were trapped, their souls bound to the lake, wandering in search of peace that would never come. But Beck had the chance to escape. He could feel the presence of his lost friends around him, Armin and Timur, their spirits torn between life and death. He knew what the entity wanted. He knew what he had to do. With great effort, Beck rose to his feet, staggering toward the edge of the lake. His reflection stared back at him, distorted by the rippling water, his face pale and gaunt. He could still hear the whispers of the white ones, begging him, pleading with him to join them. But he wouldn't. He refused. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something he had taken from the shrine. A small, bone amulet, engraved with symbols he couldn't understand. "The offering." "Take this," Beck said, his voice trembling. "Take it and let me go." For a moment the fog seemed to still. The lights dimmed, the whispers faded. And then, with a deep rumble, the entity reached out and took the amulet, its shadowy form dissolving into the mist. The fog lifted. The lake returned to its dark, still surface. The lights were gone. The whispers were silent. Beck stood there, alone, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. He had survived. But as he turned to leave the mountains behind, he knew one thing for certain. The price of survival was never truly paid.